All right, Bill, what do you think? Shall we start?
Start the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sure.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay.
So we are super excited to have Assemblyman Phil Ramos here with us. It's his first time ever presenting to this group. I have to thank Sammy Gurgis, who kind of facilitated this happening. I know that we've been to your office in Albany when we've gone up there on occasion to advocate, really in particular for BOCES. And so we have more than a handful of students on here, just to give you a sense. I know it's always exciting to be able to speak to students, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about Phil Ramos. He represents the 6th Assembly District, which includes portions of Bayshore, Brentwood, Central Islip, Islandia, and North Bayshore. Was elected to a newly created assembly seat in 2003 and has proudly served the people of that district for 18 years. During the 2015 legislative session, he was appointed Deputy Majority Leader of the New York State Assembly. That might need for you to help people understand what that means. Born in the Bronx, raised in Brentwood, the son of a correction officer and a registered nurse. From an early age, he was taught the value of helping others and giving back to the community. Has lived in Brentwood for the past 50 years, raising his 2 children and working tirelessly on behalf of that community. After graduating from Brentwood High School, went on to work as a therapy aide at the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center and later became an emergency medical technician. In 1979, Phil followed in his father's footsteps, joined law enforcement, becoming a Suffolk County police officer, dedicated himself to protecting members of the community, making the neighborhood a safer place. He also used his position to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and the Latino community, founding the Suffolk County Police Hispanic Society in 1987. He was promoted to the detective unit. After 20 years of dedicated service, Phil retired from the Suffolk County Police Department. Since he was elected to the state assembly, Phil has achieved notable increases in state aid for local school districts. That is much appreciated, as you know, that aid helping both students and taxpayers. He has also worked tirelessly to expand universal pre-K, resulting in significant increases for both Brentwood and Central Islip pre-K programs. He has worked to make the community a safe, affordable place to live. He's secured property tax rebates for homeowners, extended the property tax cap. He has also authored several pieces of legislation to keep the community a safe place for all, including fighting for harsher punishments for gang-related crimes. Assemblyman Ramos has also helped organize and establish the Long Island Latino Elected Officials Association and played an integral role in the establishment of the Long Island Black and Brown Caucus, which consists of 28 legislators from Long Island. During the 2015 legislative session, Deputy Majority Leader Ramos was elected as the first vice chairman of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. He is an executive board member of the Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, as well as a member of the Committees on Ways and Means, Aging, Education, and Local Government. Assemblyman Ramos is a member of the subcommittee on students with special needs. I just have to say your interests, as reflected in your biography, so timely and really of interest to the folks at this meeting. We are an agency that is really committed to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So we are super, super glad to have you here and to talk about how your life path really influences the legislation that you back in New York State. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate the role that BOCES plays, an integral role, especially to communities such as mine, a very diverse community, where people come from all different backgrounds, different experiences, and we have more diversity in the way our students learn. And as a result of that, BOCES provides a vital service. And you know, in my own family, I have two kids, and they're very different. One will learn by reading a book and memorizing everything, and the other one will, you know, need to be able to do something in order to, and be active in order to learn things. My son was an example of that, where he would, you know, my daughter would be able to get good grades by reading the book. My son would have trouble with his grades, but he would come home and take apart and put together the computer. And the issue was not intelligence. The issue was how he learned. When I was able to put him in a school where he was taught individually by the way he learns, he ended up, you know, having much success. He's making twice as much money as I'm making today. And and he's the one who gave me the gray hairs. I was so worried about him, you know. But that shows that our educational system should not be one size fits all. It should be tailored, and teachers and classroom sizes should be modified so that teachers can have the luxury of tailoring their teaching methods to the needs of the students. So I was asked to speak a little bit about my life. I know we have some students here, and I think some board members. A lot of what I'm going to say is directed at the students, and I know that a lot of you students come from many diverse communities on Long Island, many such as mine. I represent Brentwood, Bayshore, and Central Islip. So I was born in the Bronx, but only spent 6 months in the Bronx after I was born. And as a baby, my parents bought some land, and they wanted to get us out of the city. There was a lot of crime, a lot of issues going on there, and they bought land for $500 in a town called Brentwood back then. And they bought a quarter of an acre and built a little house there, and it was all woods. The expressway didn't reach Brentwood, and that was in 1956. And so at that time, as far as diversity in the community, there was only probably about a dozen Hispanic families, some African-American families there in my neighborhood, in Brentwood. And I grew up around that, and some poor Italian families, mostly of Sicilian descent. And that was my upbringing. I never knew anything about politics. When I would watch TV and I would see elected officials come on TV, I remember the impression I had. I never thought they were from my community. I thought, maybe they send these guys from Washington to represent us. And nobody I ever knew was an elected official. Nobody who looked like me was an elected official. Nobody who spoke of things that were of concern to me and my family were elected officials. And politics and government was just something we didn't feel included in as I grew up. The other thing I noticed as I grew up was the relationship between the police and my community. And several times I was subjected to police abuse for just walking down the street, harassed, thrown over the hood of a police car. I remember this left the impression on me and a lot of resentment when I was younger. I graduated high school, and my last year of high school, I attended BOCES. And I'm one of those who learns more by being active. And they had a wonderful program there. Had an LPN program. If you did 1 year of it, you got a nurse aide certificate. And I worked there, and I did that. And I actually worked as a nurse aide for a while. And then I went to Pilgrim Psychiatric Center. But these were all very low-paying jobs. And it was very difficult for me to get ahead. And I remember voicing my frustration to my father. And telling him that, there's got to be something else to life. I mean, I can't afford a car. I'm behind the 8 ball and everything. Every month I got to figure out what I'm not going to pay. What can I do? What options are there? And my father said to me, he says, well, Phil, I heard that the police are hiring. There's going to be a police test. Why don't you take the police test? That should be a good job, And I remember immediately, because of my experience when I was younger, I was not receptive to that. And I said, no, out of the question, Dad, I don't want to be a cop. I know I would hate that job. I would absolutely hate that job, And it was because of the impression I had of police when I was younger. And my father, my options were limited. I didn't go to college right after I graduated high school. and I was in these low-paying jobs. And my father used a little bit of ghetto logic on me. You know, he had a lot of wisdom, but I think it would be street wisdom. We can call it. And my father says, well, Phil, you said you don't want to be a cop. You know, you don't want to try and become a cop because you would hate that job. Well, do you like the job you're doing now? I said, no. He said, do you hate the job you're doing now? I said, yeah, I hate the job I'm doing now. And he said, well, why don't you hate your job and make good money at it? And that connected. That made sense to me. And I went and took the police test. I didn't know anything about police, becoming a police officer, about the law. And by the grace of God, I got a 92 on this test, and I got called. It was very difficult to pass all the obstacles. They knocked me down on a psychological. They knocked me down on a physical. I appealed everything, and I won every appeal. And by the grace of God, I became a police officer. And when I came on the police department, I was gung-ho like everybody else, wanted to do a good job. And there were very few police officers of color. There was probably about 21 out of thousands of police officers. There were only 21 officers of color. And I came on, wanted to do a good job. I noticed in the academy, some of their training, some of the things that were said were a little disturbing. The way they trained and the way they encouraged certain things that were not right towards the community. But I stayed quiet, and I was just gung-ho. I was happy to have a good job and now have a career. And I came on like everybody else, wanted to do a good job. But as I became a police officer, we got trained in every precinct. And that's part of our training. And then we would settle into one precinct. And I quickly noticed that policing was conducted differently in different communities. And I worked in wealthy communities and I worked in poor communities as a cop. And there was a difference in the way people were treated for the same things, and the attitude that the police department had, the way they conducted themselves. But again, I wasn't any militant. I wasn't anybody to speak up. But it didn't feel right. A couple of years into my career, I got to know some of the other Hispanic officers, some of the African-American officers. We used to hang out, and we would always be talking about things that happened, that we'd come home with a bad feeling in our stomach because of what we witnessed. And I got to say, at the same time, we witnessed very heroic things by police officers, by white police officers that went out of their way, that were kind, that were good to people. But we did witness violations of civil rights as well. Not the majority, but enough to be concerned about. And a mentality amongst the bosses that was troubling towards our communities. We ended up forming an organization called the Police Hispanic Society, and the African-American officers formed the Guardians, Long Island Guardians, and they were the Black Officers Association. And they were just a group. We used to just hang out and have parties. That was it, But we were always talking about these things. And we decided to try and address some of the issues and meet with the commissioner. And I remember we were speaking about some of the policies that they should change. For instance, if a person is a victim of a crime, there's no reason why a police officer should be asking them their immigration status. That has no bearing if they are a victim of a crime. If they committed a crime, that's something different. But if a woman comes in and says, I was raped, a man says, I was robbed, what does it matter what their immigration status is? What that will do is cause people not to report crimes and criminals to go free to commit crimes against everybody. Seems like a logical recommendation and conversation, but it didn't sit well with the commissioner. And I remember the commissioner saying, why do you need a police Hispanic society? Why do we need a Black Officers Association? We're all blue here. You're trying to divide us. And why are you questioning what we're doing here? And I remember, my Puerto Rican blood pressure going up as a result of that conversation. And I said to him, Commissioner, every parade on Long Island is led by the police pipe band, Irish pipe band. Do you have a problem with that organization as well? And the conversation just went downhill from there. Hispanic and African-American officers were also treated very differently. Some were fired for frivolous things. Long story short, we ended up deciding to take a stand back in the 80s, take legal action against our police department for the disparity in the way they treated our community and the way they treated officers of color. We went to the federal government. We had a press conference that got nationwide attention. After 2 years, we won that lawsuit. The Suffolk County Police Department is still under that consent decree and had to make a whole bunch of changes as a result of the lawsuit that we did. We won that battle, but I went through about 15 years of my career with a bullseye in my forehead as a result of having violated the blue wall. And yeah, I could write a book about the things that happened, the way they sicked internal affairs on me. I grew up in Brentwood. I never stopped interacting with people in Brentwood. I would walk into a bodega and there might be a wino standing up front who I known as a kid. And he would say, "Hey, Phil, how you doing?" So I'd shake his hand. Internal affairs would take a picture of me and then bring me up on charges that I'm fraternizing with criminals. To me, that was good public relations. So, I mean, these things happened over and over and over again, but I managed to survive the 20 years. I retired after 20 years. I had 2 children. We were going to move. I had custody of my kids, was raising them alone. We were going to move to Arizona. 2 weeks after I retired, I get a phone call from a man named Rich Schaefer. And he says to me, "Phil, we're looking for somebody for the assembly. And there are no Hispanics there elected to state office there's no Hispanics involved in the assembly, from Long Island, and your name came up. Somebody gave us your name." So I said to him, "Well, I'm flattered, that you want me for that, but I'm Catholic. I thought the assembly had something to do with the church." That's how little I knew about government. Shame on me. And he said, no, it's not the church. And he explained what it was. And at first I said, "Look, a Hispanic's not going to get elected to anything here on Long Island. You got the wrong guy. I'm not going to be a sacrificial lamb." But they wore me down. They got me out there and I started knocking on doors, thousands of doors. I felt like Forrest Gump. I walked so much. And come August, I had a debate with my opponent. And they started, in politics, they throw a lot of dirty stuff at you, right? And they started throwing dirty stuff at me. They kept saying, my opponent was saying, was a married man with kids and projecting me as somebody dysfunctional because I was divorced and, I had raised my own kids, but I was divorced. They researched my credit. They found out I had bad credit some years back. I had fallen behind on bills and, it was, Ramos can't handle budgets. Why would you elect him? And then I decided to come clean. And this debate was taking place at the Brentwood High School. There were hundreds of people there and it was televised on News 12. And I decided to come clean and just say, yes, I had financial problems. And yes, I went through a divorce and I've raised my own kids. And I told my story. And by the end of my story, I ended up getting a standing ovation in a debate that I thought I was getting killed on. And then I realized one thing, that people of communities of color have been ignored so much by elected officials that they don't even realize how we think. Those things they threw at me, probably in another community, they would have said, "No, Ramos has problems with his bills. He can't handle state budget. The other guy is more stable." In my community, people said, "Well, hold on, Ramos raised his own kids. I wish my baby's daddy would have stepped up to the plate and done that and taken care of business." Well, Ramos had bad credit. He was juggling bills. Well, he knows what I'm going through then. In our community, people want somebody who has lived their reality. They're not as concerned with credentials. They're concerned with your heart and that you will not turn your back on your community for politics. Come November, I got a second win there. All along, I thought I was going to lose this election. Come November, by the grace of God, I won the first Hispanic elected on Long Island to state office. And throughout the year, I've been there I'm going into my 20th year now. I was introduced as deputy majority leader. I've risen through the ranks. 3 months ago, I was just promoted to assistant speaker of the House, the highest ranking Hispanic in the New York State legislature. And as a result of my upbringing, I have brought legislation to deal with education, to deal with policing, and the many things that in my life I have experienced. And now I'm in a position to deal with this. When it comes to I saw inequities when I grew up in education, as well as in policing. In education, we have a history in this country of education and marginalizing the education against people of color as a weapon to keep communities of color from gaining any kind of power. Throughout the history of this country, a slave with a book was recognized as more dangerous than a slave with a gun. He would be killed for that. And throughout, even after slavery was abolished, we had segregated schools in this country that marginalized people of color. And even today, people say, well, okay, we're over that. That's ancient history. Even today, the very way we fund schools is racist and discriminatory. Think about it. The funding that your school gets is based on the value of homes in your community. So logic would tell you that a wealthy community in the Hamptons that has millionaire mansions will have millions of dollars, a windfall of money for their rich kids in their schools. And a community like Brentwood, Bayshore, Wyandanch, Bellport, who have lower values of their homes, would have less money going into those schools. And that's why the budgets are always tighter in those schools. That's why the education is more marginalized, because teachers have less tools at their disposition to teach you. And it's all that has happened is that same discrimination, the same racism from years ago, where years ago they used to burn a cross on your lawn. The modern day cross is done with a calculator. The modern day cross burning is done with a calculator, with that formula that says it's based on the home value. So, and your school will get less, right? They don't call it racism. They don't, but it's a cross burning. The same way the Jim Crow laws, when slaves were freed, the Constitution still says that nobody can be forced to work for free unless they have been convicted of a crime. So in the Jim Crow laws, they said, well, you know what? We lost all these slaves, and how are we now going to build roads, and how are we now going to work the plantations? And all they had to do was get Black people into the prisons. And when they got them into the prison, then they hired out chain gangs to build roads, to help businesses, to work in factories as a backdoor slave labor. So this racism and discrimination has become more sophisticated. My upbringing and having been exposed to it has, what it has done is it allowed me to create policies to even the playing field. And we came up with foundation aid. Now, what foundation aid does is it goes to poor districts, poor school areas, so that it will equalize the funding that those those school districts in the Hamptons get. Now the poor districts will get an influx of money so that they get equal funding to the wealthy districts. And those are policies that are direct response of things that we have lived and the inequities that we have seen. I have a series of bills out there on police reforms. We've seen some reforms happen in New York. They have a special prosecutor now. They repealed 58. You used to not be able to see police personnel records. A lot of these things, that's fine. They're good police reforms, but they come into play after the fact. After a cop has killed somebody, then you have a special prosecutor. After a cop has brutalized somebody, then you find out from his personnel record, he shouldn't have been on the job to begin with. So I have legislation right now that goes to the core of what happens with police throughout the country. We see all these shootings on videos, and in typical case, you'll see one cop choking somebody out or killing somebody, the other cop standing around doing nothing. At most, the one cop might get indicted down the road. Half the times, the grand jury rules in his favor. But what about all those cops who are standing around? So the bill I have makes police officers mandated reporters of police abuse. And if they don't report it, it's an e-felony for the police officer. So the police officer stands there and watches his partner kill somebody, shoot somebody, choke somebody, does nothing, says nothing, doesn't report it. He can't wash his hands and say, well, it wasn't me, it was him. He is acting in concert at that point. People of color, kids of color, I guarantee you, anybody here who is of color, their parents have had that conversation with you about how if you're with 4 or 5 friends and they're doing something wrong and the cops roll up on you, you're going to go for what your friends are doing. But that standard is not applied to police. So my legislation, making them mandated reporters, tears down that blue wall of silence, because that will change human behavior. That will make a cop say to his partner, hey, let him go. I'm not going to lose my career over what you're doing. And I have a series of other bills that address these type things. So I know I've been talking a long time. and it is 7:30 now, so it's about a half hour I've been speaking. I was told that's the limit, and then we will open it up for questions. So I'd rather have more of an interaction. I welcome any questions you have about anything that's going on, either in the assembly, in our communities, in your schools, in BOCES, or even nationwide. So at this time, certainly I'd open it up for any comments or questions from anybody.
So thank you very much. Amazing history. Thank you for sharing that, sharing your challenges and how they really have encouraged you to be doing the important work that you're doing. So if you're here and you have a question, you can either put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. We're a small enough group to do that.
Julie, if I could say, it's Ann.
Sure.
I wish we could have you in every classroom, in every township, in every state. You have lifted my morale. I'm a news junkie, and I really pay attention, and I find this to be a really upsetting time in our history. I've lived long enough that, you know, through the 60s and through, but it was so, you know, I don't want to say refreshing, because that just sounds, it was important to hear you. You really, I live in the Hamptons. I live in Sag Harbor, and the discrepancy between the neighboring town of Ridgehampton and our one-room schoolhouse, Sagaponack. I'm in Sag Harbor. We're doing okay, but we're becoming richer. We're becoming whiter. You touched on every societal issue I think we're facing, and I thank you. Really, I will follow you from now on for every word you have to say in Albany, and just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I'm at your disposition. I go to schools all over Long Island and speak. So anytime, please just give me an invite and we'll work it out.
Great.
Just to let you know, so Ann McAsee, longtime member of the BOCES board, and at one point was also a member of the Sag Harbor School Board.
Right.
And we're going to take you up on that as far as you coming and speaking to students.
Sure.
You probably know we have a law enforcement program. So we train, you know, juniors and seniors in law enforcement, but we are also doing this diversity, equity, and inclusivity work, and, you know, not only student voice, but helping students know that there's somebody out there that has their back and understands their lives, I think hugely important. So thank you for that. Other, Dave.
Hello, Assemblyman. First, two thank yous and a question. First, thank you for your overall support of our students and for BOCES in general. I've visited your office in Albany with some students before, and I think every time our students walk into your office, at least one of them walks out with an internship of some sort that is going to help them into the future. So also thank you and all your colleagues for the budget, and especially the education funding part of it. I think we're all still pinching ourselves, wondering if we're going to wake up and realize it's all a dream. It's unprecedented. You mentioned the foundation aid formula and kind of the reinstatement over the next 3 years of that. I guess my question is, do you think, is that going to put us where we need to be? Do you think that once we hit that third year of full reinstatement, will it be sustainable, and will the districts that were meant to benefit more from the foundation aid will continue to do so?
I really do think that it will make a big difference. Look, there's, you know, I mean, money is not the answer to everything, but it gives us the resources. You know, there are others, you know, some other intrinsic issues and fundamental issues that we have to deal with that have nothing to do with money, and they have more to do with policy in education. In respect to BOCES, there's a lot of funny math that goes into our formulas that hurts BOCES. The consolidation of certain funding streams and to give an appearance that you're getting the same funding, but you're actually not. And backdoor cuts that are just totally disguised, and those things have to be dismantled and dealt with. So foundation there's no magic bullet that's going to cure everything, but I think it's a big start by having something that equalizes that playing field. And if it doesn't, and if the revenues are not enough at that time, and then we have to reevaluate it and see what we do from there. And districts also, have an ability to raise a certain amount of funds on their own, but it's more progressive when we fund things through the state. Funding through the state is paid by everybody. When the schools raise taxes, they're only getting the money out of the homeowners. In a community like mine, you might have 20 houses on a block, but only 10 homeowners, because you might have 20 families, 20 homes on a block, but it might be 40 families because every home has an apartment, but only 10 people are paying those taxes. So whatever we get from the state is certainly a more progressive way of funding our schools.
Yeah. So I have a question from Alexandria. I see you just put it in the chat, but I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask it. And if you could let the assemblyman just say your name and what program you're in. And then I have a question in the chat from Leah. So go ahead, Alexandria. Can you unmute?
Yes. Hi, I'm Alexandria Patton. I'm in the Animal Science program at the Gary D. Bixhorn Technical Center.
Mm-hmm.
My question is how can us students get involved with you guys?
Well, certainly you heard mentioned there internships. Every year I have students who come to visit me up in Albany, and I end up offering them internships. So I offer this to you guys. Anybody who wants to do it, most of you have to do a certain amount of community time in order to graduate high school. You're welcome to do it in my office. Come on in, we'll show you, all the different things we do. We're constantly fighting for the community. We're helping constituents on a daily basis. There's a whole bunch of things that we do. And you will forever be able to put on your resume that you have worked in elected officials' office, something that helps you down the road. Many of the students who have done internships have ended up working for them, or for other elected officials as well. So that's one way
Another
that
question with that.
you can get involved. Mm-hmm.
What would
Go ahead. Did you have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Yes. What would you guys like to hear from us? As students, what would you officials like to hear from us?
And that's a really good question, because people think that the elected officials are here just to talk and give you ideas. We're here to listen. And certainly what I would like to hear from students are your concerns, the observations that you have, the things that you feel are unjust, the things that we can do to improve your education or anything else that has to do with your quality of life. But the thing is that, people in our community have to be proactive and reach out to their elected officials and develop relationships. You have an absolute right. People think that my boss is the governor or the Speaker of the House. My only boss is you guys. My only boss is the community. You're the ones who give me my job. You're the ones who can fire me by your vote. So you have an absolute right to engage your elected official and make your feelings known as far as whatever it is that concerns you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Question from Leah Arnold. Leah, who is our Director of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. How would you advise students to make a difference in their communities and their circles of influence?
Draw on your life experience. Nobody would be an expert on that issue more than a person who has lived your life experience. The young lady just spoke about, being involved in with your courses having to do with animals or wanting to become a veterinary. If that was their interest when they were younger, certainly draw on that. And, there are things in the community that all sorts of programs that spay animals, that do adopt animals, give them up for adoption. If your issue, if you come from a diverse community and you've been subjected, as I was, to some civil rights violations, certain things that frustrated you, Tap into that energy, tap into that frustration, turn it into something positive. Engage your elected official or create your own organization and put pressure on elected officials to do what it is you need done. But you have to be in it to win it. Nobody's going to come to your house and resolve your problems. It's only with people speaking up and creating pressure that's the only thing that moves democracy. And those who live in diverse communities, you fight injustice with the truth. And that is the biggest weapon that we can use in our communities against all the things that we see are unfair. The truth you can't change. The inequities that we talk of, you can't change. That is the truth. I come from a large immigrant community, and we hear all sorts of rhetoric. That's front and center, in every presidential election, the immigrant community. They're coming here to take something from you. They're coming here to be criminals. They broke the law. They don't go by the rules. That's all we keep hearing. And they keep repeating the word illegal, illegal, illegal so many times that in the eyes of some, those people cease to become humans, and it justifies anything that's done to them. But we seem to forget, as I said, you have to fight injustice with the truth. And you will have people who say, look, I'm not against immigrants. I'm just against illegal immigrants. Why can't they go by the same rules as my grandfather? He came here and he had $20 in his pocket and he raised himself up by the bootstraps, learned English. Nobody helped him. And why can't new immigrants go by the same rules? You fight injustice with the truth. What you do is you tell them, well, you know what? At your grandfather's time, 25 million European immigrants came to the United States. Not one of them needed a visa. They came through Ellis Island and a doctor looked in their mouth with a flashlight. And if they weren't sick, they were allowed in. You want immigrants to go by the same rules? Give them the same rules. But if you have a certain segment of our community the door was opened, and then you have a series of laws that try and close the doors for immigrants, then people are not going to roll over and die. They're going to look for opportunities. If they're starving in their own country, they're going to find a way. So it behooves us to come up with, with a legal and with a process that's orderly and that is user-friendly, and stop talking about, people of color and immigrants not going by the same rules. There was one group of immigrants who never got to see that majestic lady in New York Harbor with the torch in their hand. You know why? Because they were chained to the bottom of ships. The rules have never, ever been the same for people of color in this country. So when, I find it ironic when people say, well, why can't immigrants go by the same rules? When you have a history of this country of having different rules for people of color since its founding. Again, this knowledge we should drop to everybody. You drop the knowledge and you create awareness, because the spin that they put on things for their own purpose becomes reality to many, and they ignore the truth. You fight injustice with the truth. I'm sorry to go on and on, but it's important that our young people understand these things, because we hear so much negativity, we start to believe the things that we're fed.
Absolutely. I am just imagining you in Albany speaking the truth to your colleagues. I appreciate it. So a couple of questions. I'm actually going to take one and then back into the other. Can you just speak about the recent passing of the marijuana bill?
Yes. Well, look, the situation with marijuana is one of those cases where there's no clear, good solution to the problem. There's only one that's less worse than the other. And the issue with marijuana is that the criminalizing of marijuana from its inception has been something that's been used against people of color. In New York State, they created something called the Rockefeller drug laws that ended up giving people heavy sentences, no second chance, for possession of small amounts of marijuana or any other drug. It resulted in thousands of young Black and brown kids going to jail for 8 years for a small bag of marijuana. Now we're making it legal. And nobody's talking about restorative justice. How do you give those lives back to those kids? Continuing to make that illegal, and there's absolutely no study that shows that people of color use marijuana any more than white people do. But people of color go to jail more for marijuana through those laws that were applied selectively to our communities. So the toss up here is, what does more harm? The use, the experimentation of marijuana by somebody, or disposing of a life by putting them in jail for 8 years? Which one does more harm? And to me, legalizing marijuana will take it off the streets, because people say it's a gateway drug. There's nothing in marijuana that leads you to stronger drugs. Nothing physical in marijuana. It's just that the same person who's selling marijuana is also selling coke and is also selling heroin. So kids have access to this. So if you raise the age so that only adults can buy it and you legalize it, it's not profitable, or people don't want to take the risk of buying marijuana on the street illegally when they can buy it in the store legally. So it takes it off the streets. It also prevents the mixing of marijuana with other drugs, which many people have died from. So do we want people using any kind of substance that gets you high? No. Do we want people going to jail, young kids going to jail, having their lives and opportunities ruined for a bad decision when they're young because of the criminalization of marijuana applied primarily to people of color? No. So my decision was to support the legalization and controlled legalization of marijuana.
So Stephen Gessner has a question about taxes. Stephen, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, you mentioned, I think in your talk earlier, that you have attempted to keep taxes as low as possible. And part of that, of course, is the 2% tax cap that's been instigated. And many people support that because they want to support lower taxes. However, that 2% tax cap has had drastic effect on school funding and local district funding. And I wonder how you balance those two things.
Well, and also the 2% tax cap was not applied equally to BOCES. As I said, certain things were exempt from the 2% tax cap that didn't apply. There were different standards applied to BOCES, and there were definitely some problems there. I supported the concept of a tax cap because taxes were going crazy on Long Island. But there's a lot of bugs that have to be fixed. But as I said before, the tax cap applies to the taxes that they charge homeowners. So the more we come up with from the state, as we did this year, the less there is a need to raise those property taxes. Now, with the 2% tax cap, I do not support having a supermajority in order to override it. I believe a simple majority should be what's required. If a community wants to surpass the tax cap, it should be a democratic vote like any other, where the majority rules. It shouldn't be skewed in any particular way.
Good. So question from Catherine Romano. Stephen is also one of our board members. Catherine Romano is as well. It looks lately like politics is volatile and partisan. How can we help move a positive conversation to get both ends of the spectrum come to the middle on issues, taxes, funding, education policy, health services, policing, housing, etc.? As citizens, the fringes seem to get more attention than workable solutions. What can
I think the first thing is not to jump on the bandwagon of either extreme, and to expect, even as individuals, as non-politicians, as people, in the community, everyone has their own ideology, their own ideas, but there are so many things that we do that have nothing to do with ideology, yet we stay polarized. I'll give you an example. In my town, ISIP Township is run by all Republicans here. I am a Democrat, and a very adamant Democrat on the things that I believe in, the social issues that need to be attended to. Now, those are bigger issues. But town hall, full of Republicans, they're in charge of fixing our parks, of our roads. Is there a Republican way to fix a road or a Democratic way? There is none. So I have crossed, really crossed the aisle and reached out to my town supervisor, and I just finished putting 650,000 into Ross Park and Brentwood. We're developing it in a bipartisan effort. That's not an ideological thing. And I received criticism from party people, because both parties, I believe, have done my community a disservice, and because they put politics before people. And when you see elected officials doing that, not working with other elected officials on things that have nothing to do with ideology, I think it's up to the community to call them out on that and to expect better from us.
A question from Lisa Mangiello. She is one of our teachers and actually really good at getting her students here. She happens to be one of our animal science teachers. Speaking of students and families that need help with their immigration status, are there resources we can provide to them in the classroom, or resources that we can connect them to?
Well, certainly, yes. And my office helps a lot. So certainly, you can connect to anybody, and they don't have to be from my district. I help people from anywhere. So certainly, if there is any immigration, you can assure them that they can come see me, and they don't have to fear visiting an elected official, no matter what their immigration status is. But we'll try our best to help them. Maybe the law doesn't allow us to help them, but they're not going to be hurt as a result of coming and trying to resolve their problems. And in many cases, people who think they're in a hopeless situation, we're able to find an avenue for them, including young immigrant students who, for many years were unable to pay for college. It's students who, no matter what anybody thinks about an adult that crossed the border without documents, the child didn't take part in that decision. How can society punish a young person and marginalize them for life because of a decision that their parents made? If an American citizen gets locked up for DWI, should we punish their kids? It's inhumane, and there's no society in which I could see that justifies that. And as a result, I was one of the prime sponsors in the New York Dream Act, which helps give tuition assistance to young immigrant students to have a fighting chance in life, the same way everybody else does.
Thank you for that, because that is something that as teachers, we do see that in the classroom, and there are many times that we want to help and sometimes we don't know how. So you'll get some phone calls.
Certainly.
And I appreciate everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we have a question, I think, from a student. I'm guessing Bella is a student. It's a follow-up to your comments on the legalization of marijuana. But with the legalization of marijuana, it means many people can get it. But the question I have is, how are you going to keep younger children from partaking in the substance? As an 18-year-old, my question is, should the age be moved to older than 21?
Well, 21 is the age in which somebody can drink. The age of 21 applies to a lot of things. And as I said, some things we have to do are messy, but they're the lesser of the two evils. Is there any magic bullet that will stop young people from using marijuana? I doubt it. Taking it off the streets might limit that, because they can't legally buy it from the dispensaries under legal marijuana. But will that stop an adult from buying it from them the same way an adult can buy a bottle of rum for them? No, there's people who can get around the law. There's young people who might, but I believe that it will limit access. It won't be as accessible as it is now. And it's more controlled, less dangerous for young people. And, a lot of times I hear this, they'll say, well, young people are going to be able to use marijuana or pass a certain law, and they'll say, yeah, but somebody can get around it, so the law is no good. One thing I learned is that we should never let the perfect get in the way of the good. And this is one of those cases that, no, there's certainly not a perfect solution. There's nothing perfect about it, but it's the better of the two evils. Does it solve every problem? No. Can somebody get around it? No. Is it much better than throwing people in jail and throwing away the key as a young person? Has that done more damage than a young person who, might experiment with it? Well, I'll leave it to your opinion. In my mind, I believe that has done much more damage than the potential skirting of the law by a young person if we legalize marijuana.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Julie, it's Linda Goldsmith. I do have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, well, actually I have two questions. One is there going to ever be a time where the 2% tax cap will be a true 2%? Because sometimes it's 0.1 and sometimes, it depends, the CPI is sometimes much lower than 2 and sometimes it's higher. When it's higher than 2, the tax cap is still 2. And my second question is that do you have a great deal of difficulty getting bipartisan support for much of the legislation that you introduce?
Yes, as you know, we're very polarized, especially these days. So getting bipartisan support is difficult. Luckily, and luckily for now, we have majorities in both houses, so we don't need to count on votes from the other side. But that also absolute control also leads to abuses. And traditionally, what happens is there's a cycle. Democracy is cyclical. What will happen is Republicans will gain control of everything, and they'll say, okay, survival of the fittest, lower taxes, but then they have to cut services. Then we end up with social problems as a result of cut services and all sorts of people going off the rails because there are no safety nets. And then people get fed up with that. And they say, well, what about the working person? What about the poor person? And they get up and then they vote for Democrats. Democrats win, and then they want to be everything to everybody. And they want to solve every problem. And they want to tell everybody what they should or shouldn't do and tax everything. And then the taxes go way up. And then people get fed up with that and vote back in the Republicans. In a way, it's the beauty of democracy, because over the long run, what we see is that we hopefully end up a country in the middle, which for the most part, we have been. Recently, that's been in danger. And there are threats that we will not be a country in the middle anymore, from both sides, I would say. But insurrections, attacks on our capital, that's a whole new ball game, and something we must be really vigilant about. And the days of bipartisan, as I said before, it's up to the community to expect bipartisan work on things that we can agree on, things that have nothing to do with ideology. We shouldn't be automatically be in opposition of everything the other side does just because they're from the other side, But again, when the community holds us accountable for that, that is, I think, when we'll see that calm down.
Yeah, thank you. Linda, did you have another question, or did that incorporate both?
No, the other question was, is the 2% tax cap ever going to be just a true 2% tax cap?
It's so hard for me to determine that, what will happen in the future. And every year they tinker with it. They try and make it better. We insisted at times that things be removed, held harmless from that tax cap. Costs that the schools have no control over, that go up. Why should they be bound by a cap when the increase in spending is not their fault?
Yeah.
So, like everything in a democracy, it's a work in progress. So, I really would not be able to predict that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's, that is, I think, one of the things the governor likes to say is a feather in his cap, and certainly has helped a lot of taxpayers. So I do just have to share, Bella Ambrose does not agree with your place on marijuana. So let me just read this. Well, in schools, it's coming up more and more. I understand what you're saying about that. It's not a good idea for children around 16 and 17-year-olds who get the privilege for driving to be able to obtain it, whether it be from older individuals or their older friends. It's been proven as an issue with younger students. So let me just say this to you, Bella. First of all, I think that the education that you have had, that drugs is not good, has done a wonderful job of helping you to understand that drugs are not good. And I'm going to encourage you to keep to that and let your friends know drugs are not good. It is an incredibly complicated issue, as the assembly person has shared with us. There's a lot of equity issues related to marijuana and how it is managed, not only in this state, but in other places. And yes, Mrs. Romano from our board says that if you're not already, she thinks that you should be on the BOCES advocacy team, because you obviously are a strong advocate and I'm interested in sharing your thoughts. So we are just at about a minute before 8. I don't see any other questions here at the moment. So let me just take the opportunity to say that you have definitely held up to the reputation you have of being a passionate speaker who, has allowed your life to really direct the work that you do as an elected official. We are super, super appreciative of all of that work. Really appreciate the fact that you've come and spoken to us. I think everything that you have said related to how your life really experiences has driven your work now as an elected official really in line with this agency. Our vision statement is providing educational services that transform lives. And we believe we do that every day with the passionate folks that we have who work here and the students who come and allow us to educate them. So on behalf of this committee, I do have a plaque here that we will get to you.
Oh, thank you.
Really in appreciation, it says the certificate is presented to Assemblyman Phil Ramos for sharing how your life path has impacted the legislative agenda of New York State. So again, very, very appreciative of that and of your time. Bill, if you want to wrap up with a thank you to the committee.
Yes, I'd just like to thank you, Assemblyman Ramos, for spending time with us tonight. And also, I would like to appreciate the effort of the meetings of the members of the Legislative Committee during the COVID crisis. We had held 8 meetings this year, and the attendance was excellent. I know Julie's going to speak about an evaluation, and the evaluation, I would like to ask everyone to please put thought into it so we can improve our program. This is our 5th year, and we want to continue working and making this one of the better programs, well, not the better, the best program in Suffolk County in legislation, working with the students.
So what we will do, because this year we have people's email addresses because you needed to sign in for these meetings. So we're going to send the evaluation out, even if you only came to one meeting. We're asking you to give us feedback on what you thought about that meeting. Again, this is about learning about the legislative process and learning about the importance of your vote. I think the message you heard today, I don't know if I really told the Assemblyman that when I spoke with him, but you really spoke that in your life story, right? That you allowed it to, help you understand what it meant to be an elected official and really try to make your communities in this entire state better. So again, we greatly appreciate you being here, greatly appreciate the membership in this committee, and are looking forward to your honest feedback on the evaluation because it will drive our program for next year. So that being said, I wish you all a good evening, and we will see you next year in some format for our legislative committee. And thank you also to Bill Miller, who does such a wonderful job of chairing this committee. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Good luck to you all too. To the students.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.